Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, we have another episode of Mountaineer Report here, made possible by West Virginia Sports Now, available everywhere you get your podcasts, also right here on YouTube. I am Mike Asti, and I will be joined in a matter of moments by my co-host here at WVSN, and for this show, Luke Blain, and we are going to touch on some interesting comments from the football head coach, Rich Rodriguez, about his plans for the future and kind of seeing some fruits of the recruiting labor here this past week, and some tea leaves about what's to come. Of course, it is Brawl Week, so we are recording this ahead of the Backyard Brawl, the first for Ross Hedge as head coach of the men's team, and a big game for the women's team as well. Maybe we'll touch on that. And again, we will do it all here for West Virginia Sports Now. Luke, what's going on? It's kind of a big week for Mountaineer sports in a way. As the weather gets colder, the sports world in West Virginia heats up, I guess.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You're in that nice little season of overlap where you get football and basketball at the same time. Both soccer teams are still alive for WVU.
Yes.
I'm actually, if you see me, I told you this before we started. So for whoever's watching, if you see me look to my left, it's because I have that game between WVU and Marshall on right now in the men's Sunbelt tournament. And I think they're about to go to penalty kicks. So, but no, it's a really fun time. And of course, you get all those sports who are kind of active the whole year round as well at this time. And it's a great time to be a college sports fan if you're a fan of all around sports and not just even your main ones, just like football and basketball. So great time to be a WVU sports fan, honestly.
Yeah, 100%. And when you add in what's going on professional with, the NBA, NHL in full swing, Major League Baseball coming off their World Series, but now getting into the hot stove a little bit with some drama, and then the NFL, of course, obviously nationally in college sports, you could definitely make an argument this is the best portion of the sports calendar. The other argument maybe is the spring, of course, March Madness, and then going into the summer and what's going on there. But I think this right now takes the cake. And it even involves a lot for WVU sports as well. And yeah, West Virginia Marshall, they are a rivalry on the pitch. I contend it's not a rivalry on the gridiron, but it's one on the pitch for sure. But what we're going to talk about here, the open of this show actually is what's going on the gridiron, not for Marshall, but for the Mountaineers. And not even so much what's going on the rest of this season, because, of course, they can make a bowl game if they win out. They have Arizona State coming up. It's the last long road trip. They're coming off back-to-back victories. They took care of business against Colorado. Didn't play all that great. The game kind of embodied those two teams' season, but they got the win. Obviously, the big win the week before over a ranked team on the road in Houston. And the offense has been showing signs of life, to say the least, after being so bad for several weeks. But we're mostly going to put a pin in that for the purpose of this show. And, of course, if they make a bowl game, that would be good. If they don't, it might kind of not make a difference of this year and what you think of this season now that they at least got some positive play in there for fans to be optimistic for the future. And we'll see what the roster looks like for the future, because this season, regardless of how it ends, even if it ends winning out and spoiling for the Red Raiders and getting in a bowl game, this season's not exactly what Mountaineer fans want or what Rich Rod wants for his tenure or what he even promised would occur during his tenure. So can he make that maybe happen next year is kind of the segue here. And we've seen some success recently in recruiting. He did literally say that he didn't really get a full chance at it last year because they got there so late, had to inherit most of Brown's high school class. He wants to focus more on high school recruiting now, get a bigger high school class, have almost 35 high school recruits is his goal for 2026. I believe he's at 29, 28 right now, give or take one. So he may add even more. We may even see more commits. I might have to write more commits at midnight or 11 p.m. when they apparently like to announce. So there's some success there and maybe more to come. And even his strategy has been revealed a little bit. And that's where I'd like to start here. He literally said that he wants to go after more two-way players. So what we've seen from Curtis Jones, who went from linebacker to goal line running back, punching in a couple touchdowns, did it for necessity because of all the injuries and lack of size with everybody else, but it's worked out so far. And Rich Rod and even Zach Alley, the D coordinator, mentioned because of all the injuries, because of the way the sport is, because unlike the NFL, you can't trade for somebody mid-season, you can't sign someone off your practice squad mid-season. You're kind of stuck with your roster being set. Players could, ditch you, but you can't really do much mid-season. That now they want two-way players that can help them out on both sides of the ball. So number one, do you like this strategy? Because it's still very rare for those players to have immense success. Maybe we'll see more of it, but it's still a rarity. And maybe could have them add players they think are uber athletes who could play two-way, but maybe not get the actual best of that position. That maybe would be the negative, that they could get persuaded for the athlete over the best of the position. But do you like that strategy? Do you think we're going to see more of the Curtis Jones type players? Do you believe that they can have success looking at a roster that they maybe would want a bunch of two-way players, not one or two, but it sounds like you may see 3, 4, 5, 6 players go both sides of the ball. Wouldn't put it past Rich Rod, and it might happen more in the sport. Rich Rod thinks so, but it still would be pretty rare.
Yeah, I think that, the way they kind of framed it, it does sound like it would kind of be more of a necessity type of thing. Uh,
Yeah,
More so leaning toward the way that Curtis Jones is being used. Now, obviously, that was not the plan coming into the season. Honestly,
sure.
the running back room was one of their deeper. The running back room
Right.
was one of their deeper rooms. Looking at it in the off season, and it just
Yeah,
everybody's dropping like flies there. But
100%.
I think I'm not opposed to this. Honestly, I think that Travis Hunter at Colorado really set the stage for guys to come in and at least give it a shot. I mean,
Yeah.
it does kind of take me back to the beginning of the season whenever Rich Rod said if Rodney Gallagher ended up back out there at corner, then he would have done a bad job recruiting corners. So
Right.
now the way it sounds like we could just loop right back around to Rodney
Yeah.
Gallagher being on defense again,
It's kind of funny that,
if absolutely necessary.
yeah, it's kind of funny. He wants two-way players, but not Gallagher. He wants two-way players, but he's not trying Gallagher out, even when the
Yeah.
secondary was so bad. Not trying Gallagher out. He's still
Yeah.
Mr.
Hey,
Jet Sweep. Yeah,
someone's got to run that jet sweep, and I
sure.
don't think anybody can do it like Gallagher right
No, he's
now. But
perfecting it for sure. Yeah.
but
That is, I actually forgot about that. No one else really brought that up. Yeah, he did rebuff Gallagher immediately to open up the season, but he's
yeah,
interested in two-way players. Gallagher, one more year, senior year, maybe do it again. Who knows if he's
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
it could be. But I think specifically more so in the West Virginia, Ohio, at least maybe it's probably a smaller school thing, but I feel like a lot of players in high school are two-way players anyway.
oh yeah,
And
yeah,
maybe you don't see that in the bigger cities like, up north or even in the South, but I know that personally in my high school in Point Pleasant, we had our quarterback playing linebacker as well. So, I think that's just the way it goes.
yeah.
And I think that, when it comes to looking for those two-way players, I'm not sure you're going to have to look as hard to find them. Maybe not of course, your 5-star, 4-star recruits probably specialize in one position, but I know that there's a lot of wide receivers who are also corners, who are also kick returners. So, specifically on those sides of the ball, I feel like it might be hard to find somebody who would be able to play both sides on the line. So I think that would be an interesting one to see if that would work. But I know for skill positions, I know that there's plenty of wide receivers slash corners slash safeties out there.
Yeah, wide receiver, corner, I guess kind of running back, linebacker, offense, defensive line. You see that a lot. You see a lot of athletes, especially in West Virginia. Maybe this will lead to more West Virginia in-state recruiting because even the best years of the program, the best players haven't really been from West Virginia. Of course, there have been some, but West Virginia thinks of their recruiting base, kind of a local recruiting base, as beyond the state. It goes into Western Pennsylvania. You're seeing a lot more recruits into Western Pennsylvania. Neil Brown did some, of course, he got Gallagher, but Rich Rod's really trying to really compete in there more so than maybe even the past several seasons. Of course, Ohio that you mentioned, Virginia, Maryland, that's really the base of the local recruits, quote unquote local recruits that West Virginia goes after. And then of course they dip into Florida, they go to New York, they're all over the damn country now, like everybody else. You're going to find two-way players. There are two-way players out there. A lot of high school athletes, even if they know they're going for one position in college, have experience two-way wise in high school. 100%. That's almost across the board. But it'll be interesting how much he uses the two-way players, how much he tries to use them if he has everybody healthy, because he also, the same press conference, Luke, he also mentioned that he assumes, basically, to paraphrase, he's not going to deal with as many injuries to key players again next year. He only had this happen one other time in his 30-year coaching career that he can recall. So, assuming he doesn't have this horrendous luck again with injuries, you may not have to go into the well of two-way players as much, but maybe he wants to. It could be harder for other teams to scheme. Maybe he thinks he's going to revolutionize this instead of just the Travis Hunter thing, which you bring that up, and somebody actually asked the question and brought it up as well when he mentioned two-way players. It's obviously the peak of it. That's the peak. That's well beyond Curtis Jones. But still, maybe you're going to see more of it. Maybe it'll become more of a thing. Maybe he'll try to do it more. Maybe he thinks other coaches are going to do it as well. And maybe he thinks that's even an advantage that he'll have in recruiting. I mean, that maybe is the advantage he'll have in now trying to pursue Matt Sieg again, who is a Western Pennsylvania 4-star recruit, played quarterback, set some records, Fort Cherry. He's coming out. He was going to go to Penn State, loves James Franklin. He's now opening up his recruiting because James Franklin got fired by the Nittany Lions. And he's looking at West Virginia. He's also looking at Pitt. He's looking at maybe even staying at Penn State. He's looking at Virginia Tech. He's looking at Notre Dame. He's looking at wherever James Franklin goes, and maybe the assumption even could be Virginia Tech. And he's looking at a lot of schools that West Virginia often recruits against, but he was going to go play safety at Penn State. A lot of those schools are also recruiting him at safety. If West Virginia would say, hey, man, you're not going to be quarterback probably. Safety makes sense, but we'll do a two-way thing. We'll give you some time. Maybe safety. Maybe we'll try wide receiver. Maybe he can be a slot receiver. Maybe we'll give him chances on the offensive side of the ball. I know for sure from interviewing him in the past when they were recruiting him initially, I think it might even been 2 years ago, that he wants to play offense as well. He's dreamed of playing offense as well. He would love to play offense as well, even wanting to play quarterback, actually, when I talked to him originally. Kind of gave it up because he thought his best chance at college or high-level ball in Power 4 is safety, is corner, is defense, nickel, wherever he ends up playing. Maybe they can say we kind of agree, but also we'll give you a chance on offense if that's really your dream. Maybe that's also a recruiting edge that other schools maybe don't want to offer. So maybe that's part of this as well here. Luke Blain, Mike Asti, Mountaineer Report here, West Virginia Sports Now, talking some recruiting and some recruiting success by the Mountaineers so far. So in addition to wanting to look for two-way players, Luke, I'm sure you've seen, and of course, a commitment is a commitment. You got to take this with a grain of salt in this era until somebody signs and literally steps foot on campus, until the season's about to start or spring ball or fall camp. Nothing's fully locked in. Of course, we see players decommit all the time and switch things up, and more is to come likely. And the class is already bigger than it's been, and it maybe will even get bigger. And it's a full year now recruiting for Rich Rod and his staff, whereas last year, again, they pretty much inherited what Neil Brown gave them. And I will add, to Neil Brown's credit, it could have been zero. He actually worked to keep those kids at WVU despite getting fired. I don't know if I would have done that. But nonetheless, Rich Rod's had some recruiting success. He's flipped kids from Power 4s. He got a North Carolina kid that flipped from UNC. Of course, there's a lot of turmoil there. Maybe he thinks Belichick's going to leave or get ousted or whatever. But still, he's flipping Power 4 kids. He's flipping kids in general. He's getting commitments. He says he wanted 35 kids. He's going to likely get there. That's a high number for anybody. I don't know where the recruiting ranks are going to land, but he's certainly looking like he's going to add some 4 stars in this class. It's not always going to just be 3 stars that fans think that's kind of the peak for where they normally get kids at or where they finish in terms of ranks. Does Rich Rod's recent recruiting success and kind of what he's saying and seeing a little bit of the fruits of that labor come true provide you optimism that maybe he's, not just, blowing smoke and we're actually going to see next year be, okay, I'm here for a year. I can recruit this. I'm going to show you, and they can actually have a successful season next year.
Yeah, I think there's always that possibility, right? I think, one thing that kind of sticks out to me is that I think high school recruiting and portal recruiting are 2 different things.
Yeah.
I think that you absolutely can't, I think that bringing in 35 freshmen would be great. I think there are some good names, some guys who could get some minutes next year, and some more that are looming that, look like they're kind of leaning toward WVU.
Right.
So I think that when it comes to the portal as well, you are looking to bring in established players. That is something that I was critical of Rich Rod for last off season, and it's uh, kind of coming to it now where, I wasn't high on the team at the beginning of the year. And a lot of people, so
Yeah.
some people I think were a bit too optimistic. And that was just because I saw the talent that he brought in from the portal. And those are the guys who have the experience. Those are the guys who, whether it, is at an FCS school or a MAC school somewhere, they have the snaps under their belt. So, but just wasn't enough for this year in the Big 12. And maybe, the possibilities there that they go 2-0 in the next 2 weeks and they make a bowl game. I would consider this season a success if so. But I think
Yeah.
he really needs to go out into the portal and get some game breaking transfers, maybe add some wide receiver depth. Definitely need some help on the defense, specifically in the defensive back room. So I think that it does give me optimism. It gives me optimism that he can bring in players who can buy into that hard edge mentality, because I think it is such a mentality driven program that he is running. And I have a hard time imagining that any kid who's just in it to get the paycheck is going to want to stick around and play for
Sure.
Rich Rod.
Sure.
So you need to have those type of players who have that level of buy-in, have that level of synchronization with that mentality and what they're trying to accomplish here, and then you can start to lay those foundational building blocks. I just think you have to find a way to get some of the kids here who can elevate the program while buying into that, because mentality, unfortunately, just isn't enough.
That's definitely the case, especially with this Rich Rod program more than any really other era of WVU football. Obviously, the first tenure would be the other one that was similar to this in terms of needing the mentality, but needing the mentality in this era is even more important. You do need that buy-in, and you need the right type of kid to want to play for Rich Rod, even in this era, and to be hard edge. But I think what we're seeing, the glass half full take would be that number one, he is having success sitting down in the room and selling kids, selling top recruits on what he's doing as a coach. Maybe there is a little bit of kind of what Huggins experienced and what West Virginia basketball has not experienced since him, that they are just going to be they're going to be kids that are going to want to just play for Rich Rod, even though it's hard edge and maybe they won't want to do it in this era. There might be some other kids that say, okay, he's a borderline Hall of Fame coach. I want to learn from this guy, just like Eric Stevenson came to WVU to play for Bob Huggins. He said that's the reason he wanted to play for Bob Huggins. So Rich Rod might be a tie-breaking scenario in some regard because of his accolades. And you'd have to imagine, even though they used it as an excuse last year, that the money wasn't right, even though they said it was going to be better, and then it wasn't right, and they lost out in some recruiting battles because of money, that Rich Rod said it's been rectified, Ren Baker said it's been rectified. Myself, I take that with a grain of salt and roll my eyes a little bit, because we heard that song and dance a year ago, and then now they're coming out saying the money wasn't right and using it as an excuse. However, to be able to get these certain recruits, and I'll say it, Kevin Brown, who's throwing the WVU gloves on in the middle of his high school games, and he's a 4-star offensive lineman that was going to Penn State, was certainly going to get money there. I know that. And now he's looking at West Virginia in terms of flipping over to the Mountaineers. You have to imagine, I'm not saying they're going to beat out Ohio State or those schools in terms of finances at all, if it's money versus money, but you have to imagine they're at least able to do more financially. And if you have a 4-star, like Kevin Brown has Ohio State also interested in him. So as much as he might buy into hard edge, Luke, if Ohio State says I'll give you, and just random numbers, if Ohio State says I'll give you $2 million and West Virginia says I'll give you $200,000, and he likes hard edge and likes Rich Rod, he's probably going to say I can't do it. That's a lot more money over there. I got to take the money for my livelihood. West Virginia has to have a little bit more or be getting closer, has to be, or else they wouldn't be in line for these kids. Certainly not Kevin Brown. You have to imagine that. I mean, of course, We're still in the middle of a season. Any reporting that comes out right now, what's going to be in their bank next year, anyone who wants to write that article, there's no way that can be 100% factual right now. More donors are going to come in. When people wrote that last year, Rich Rod said, okay, that's the case. And then 6 months later, it says the money wasn't there and disputes all those reports. You don't really know 100% until we get further into this. But to see success in recruiting has to provide some optimism that the money's better. Has to. Because even if you buy into Hard Edge and buy into Rich Rod, kids go to schools for coaches and money. So, yeah, okay, Rich Rod coaches. Zach Alley's a coach. The staff coaches. They like that. You got to have the money be closer, at least. And maybe it's at least closer now to be able to win out and get some of these kids. And Kevin Brown is that would be a major win. And we're speaking before his announcement. It could happen any minute. It could be happening as we're recording this, to be honest, because he's wearing the gloves. He's in images with the gloves. I know he's talked to him and visited them, and everyone in media's talked to him. I've written 6 stories and talked to him 85 times. It seems like he's coming. Quite frankly, Luke, I don't understand why he hasn't announced the damn thing yet. So that's the only thing. Like, I'm not sure why. He's almost teasing everybody and liking the flirtation to this point. So add him on, basically. That would be a major deal. They need to get the offensive line to be at a certain level before anything else matters for this team, really. Obviously, they need a quarterback who can elevate, and maybe that's Scotty Fox, maybe it's not, but they need an offensive line, or that's not going to work for anybody. So getting a 4-star on the O-line, a gigantic deal. And, of course, flipping Power 4 kids, a big deal. It has to be a positive for Rich Rod as a recruiter, for the staff as recruiters, and for the finances. Has to be. We'll see where the class ends. I also will add, because you brought up the transfer portal, and while everything you said is true, they do need to do better in the portal. They do need to get some playmakers. They do need to spend more in the portal to actually vie for a conference title, and we'll see if that actually ends up being the case or not throughout this year. And last year's portal class was not, it was vast. It was a lot of players, but it wasn't enough in terms of impact guys. And that includes the players that were there and then were cut, or the players that chose to leave, etc. But I also want fans to realize that the plan that Rich Rod's employing is not incredibly rare. I feel like a lot of West Virginia fans think this is just totally out of the box, rare, old school. No one else is doing this. Of course, Ohio State and those schools are trying to, they're going to spend whatever money. They're going to retain all their players that are good. They're going to bring in other players and seal them. That's Ohio State. That's those schools. West Virginia is never going to be that. But there are a lot of schools who are currently ranked in the top 25 right now, who are similar programs, who are employing what Rich Rod's employing, and that is to do well in recruiting, to do as well as possible in high school recruiting, to develop guys that are high school players, that are top-notch high school athletes, not just all kind of lower level, but get some of those 4-star plus kids, cultivate them, develop them, and then, you got to pay more. You got to spend the money to retain them, but try to retain them year after year. Don't just have it be 1 year. You're not always going to lose them, but try to be able to retain them, and then also add in portal players. It does not, in no way am I advocating for doing nothing in the portal. They need to bring in portal players, and he will. I do believe he said he'll bring in 10 to 20 and have 30, 35 in high school recruiting and try to retain the others, and it won't be as chaotic as last year. That's kind of good. You don't want to have 80 new players all in the transfer portal every single season. That's impossible to build chemistry. He said the culture wasn't even in there till half the year this season. That's because of that inconsistency and incontinuity with the roster. So you need to do well in the portal. You need to do well in high school recruiting. You need to develop the guys and keep them, and you need to marry it together. And I think his plan of trying to marry it together, even if he leans more in high school recruiting, is not as rare as fans think and not necessarily a bad one. You just can't bring in 50 transfer players every year and expect that to work. So you got to bring in some and got to have them be better in playmakers. But doing this well high school recruiting, it's not bad. If you don't retain any of them and they're good and then you lose them every year, then of course it's bad. But that could happen with transfer players anyway. So we'll see the fruits of this, and we'll also see if Kevin Brown freaking announces, because right now that would be the feather in the cap for this freaking recruiting class. Luke Blain, Mike Asti here, Mountaineer Report, West Virginia Sports Now of course, available everywhere you get your podcasts, of course, here on YouTube and throughout our network. Now, you mentioned that if they make a bowl game, that would be a successful year. So I guess last point on football before we transition to some brawl talk ahead of Ross Hodge's first Backyard Brawl. So if you are listening to this archive-wise, maybe the brawl's been played, and we'll do a show to give our thoughts on how that goes, because obviously that's a major test and the first test of this team that's kind of been hot and cold so far this year on the court, and even a big game for the women on Friday after the men play in that Backyard Brawl. But is it that Rich Rod needs to win out and make a bowl for this to be a successful year with all the injuries and the roller coaster ride? Can he go 1-1? Or maybe even if he goes 0-2 because these are two good teams, can he show you something just on being competitive against really good teams? He at least doesn't have the worst season in program history now of the modern era based on what we've seen recently. He does have a ranked win. He's had this team play well in recent weeks. They're getting better, and they have a mini win streak going. Is it just they got to make a bowl, or is there anything else that can occur this year that on the field with this roster and wanting some of these players to come back that you then can say, okay, you can pivot this into momentum for next year? Or does it have to really be beating two contenders to end 2025?
Yeah, I think that maybe this is because of the way the season started out, but I think there is a certain level of success to this season for the sole fact of this team has evidently gotten better as the season's gone on. You had that little rough stretch at the beginning of Big 12 play. It's been hard for them to even keep consistency from a roster standpoint with all the injuries and who's getting snaps and playing time. But the last couple games in particular, man, I mean, they're playing winning football. It didn't look as great against Colorado, at least from the offensive side, as they did against Houston, but they made the plays necessary to win that game. And I can tell you, I think any Mountaineer fan can tell you that's more than what they were doing against teams like BYU, Kansas, all of
Yeah.
those teams. So
Utah.
I think there is a visual aspect of them getting better. It's not like Houston's a bottom feeder in the Big 12 anymore. They were a ranked opponent at the time. Colorado, maybe. But you have a chance to really move forward in the next couple weeks where you have a good, a solid team in Arizona State, and then you have Texas Tech. And I mean, if you go, I think, those two are really knock it out of the park wins if you can
Right.
get both of those and make a bowl game. I think that's the sign where it's clearly a success. To nobody can deny that this season will be a success based on the way it's gone, based on the way the team's improved. I think if they can at least hang in there and, I'm sure the team probably wouldn't tell you this. I know Rich Rod wouldn't tell you this, but
Yeah.
if they can just hang in there, I think, and play competitive games the next couple weeks, even if they lose both, I think there is a level of success to be taken away from this year. And they won some big games. They beat Pitt. They went out there and won whenever it seemed it would be easy to just kind of hang it up and just give it up. I think that looks good from a recruiting standpoint. I think that's the type
Yeah.
of team that recruits are going to want to play for. So I don't know. I think that, there's more levels to success for a football team than just wins and losses. I absolutely believe that. But it would be a clear indicator of this season being a success. I mean, at least from my standpoint, where I predicted them to go 5-7. If they make a bowl game, they're going to prove me wrong, and they're going to have a success, at least by my standards.
Yeah.
So I do, I would feel comfortable saying that there are levels of success to this team, even if that doesn't happen and they upset Arizona State and Texas Tech.
It's kind of funny that if they would end this 6-6 and win out and finish with a 4-game win streak, beating the defending conference champion, beating a ranked team on the road, beating Texas Tech and all the money they spent, and maybe spoil their year. If all of that occurs, wow, that would for sure be a successful year one in general, especially with everything that has occurred this year with all the injuries and adversity that Rich Rod's had to deal with, and many other coaches would have just totally lost the team during that losing skid. So you give him credit and the staff credit for keeping this team bought in, even when they felt like they had nothing to play for. But it also would create a little bit of a what-if story, Luke. I mean, some fans would have their mind wonder that, okay, if they can beat these good teams and they can still be bowl eligible without Jaheim White and with all these injuries, if they just didn't look like such a mess for so many weeks and maybe would have won one of those games, or if they would have had Jaheim White all year, because we said he's probably not a difference of 4 wins, but maybe he's a difference of 1 win. So if you go 6-6 and then add one more for Jaheim, add another one for maybe a myriad of all the other players that were injured, maybe Jaden Bray, and then maybe just say they're going to play better during the stretch in which they lost so many damn conference games and got blown out week after week. You're all of a sudden building an 8-9 win season here where they're very much in the Big 12 race with what's gone on this year. And then, of course, you win the Big 12, you're in the CFP no matter what your record is. It's a little bit of a what if that it could actually have been freaking better, even with the credit to have the season end on a high note. That's what'll be funny about it. But in all reality, when you lose that many key players, you are in year one. The roster was always flawed. Recruiting was never as sound as maybe it was advertised in the offseason. It was a hard schedule at times. 6-6 in a bowl game was what I always thought maybe could occur and would be the ceiling for this team. I don't know if I ever dreamed that it would be possible when they were going through their losing skid and they were getting blown out week after week. So to even have this be a conversation right now is a gigantic deal. Do I think they're going to win out? No. I wouldn't be shocked if they lose both games. However, I do think now, looking at the season now as is, knowing the injuries, knowing they did beat Pitt, knowing they do have a big ranked win, a road ranked win, the first road ranked win since before Neil Brown under Holgerson, that, hey, if they're at least now they can't lose by 30 points, or you certainly can feel like the optimism from the last couple games or last 3 games, even if you include TCU, that washes away. But if they're competitive, certainly if they go 1-1, especially if they play well on the road at Arizona State on a long road trip, if they show they're still bought in, if they still perform to a certain level, at least to where they've been performing the last 3 weeks from TCU on, after UCF really on, then I think it's a success, even if they only have 4 freaking wins, and you can at least pivot that next year, use some excuses, use the money, use recruiting, use getting there late. You can do all of that. You can't use those excuses for next year, as I already have said. But if you recruit well, you end strong, you retain some players, you maybe feel like you got your QB, you build around, maybe you bring in a veteran to compete, maybe you try to keep Zach Alley if he's going to be persuaded to leave elsewhere, if you do like him as a defensive coordinator. Hey, then maybe next year can be the special year that some dreamed of for this year, and year 2 is more reasonable anyway. But if you lose by 30 points these last 2 games, I don't care who the hell you're playing, then of course there's reason for that optimism to go away. And we'll see what happens. Right now, I believe Arizona State is favored 10.5 in some books, 11.5 in other books. Maybe that could even jump more. They are at home. They're not as good as they were a season ago, but certainly could get the win in their favor to get the win. And then Texas Tech has a lot to freaking play for, and they're beating everybody. So with the roster they put together, even in Morgantown, Texas Tech should be favored. But hey, West Virginia maybe could play the role of spoiler. And then, hey, again, they always can have in the back of their mind that if Pitt doesn't win the ACC and loses a game or so and goes 2-3 at the end, they can say that maybe they handed them the bad loss that stopped them from getting in the CFP as an at-large. So there's something to take away. But again, the excuses for this year won't work next year, but at least the recruiting so far, I believe, is showing signs of optimism for this team moving forward. Luke Blain, Mike Asti here, Mountaineer Report, again, available everywhere you get your podcasts. We will kind of preview the Backyard Brawl now. So if you're listening after the fact, then, the game's already been played, but we are in front right now of Ross Hodge's first Backyard Brawl. So a couple things here. Number one, Luke, what do you need to see from this team to get this win over Pitt? Pitt's been hot and cold. West Virginia's been hot and cold. This is the first test for both teams. I think there's more pressure on Hodge than even on Capel, who maybe if he has a bad year could be fired. But there's a lot of pressure on Hodge in year 1 to get this program back in the right direction and get off this losing streak against the Panthers. Because prior to the scandal and everything that's gone on the last couple years, West Virginia had a 6-game win streak over Pitt and has the all-time mark over Pitt. Pitt's been narrowing it up because of what's been happening in Morgantown the last several seasons. Can Ross Hodge change that and get a big staple win to start off his first season in his tenure?
Well, I think potentially. I really do. I've been high on this WVU team. A lot of people who I talk to know that I've been high on this WVU
Yeah.
team. I think the pieces are absolutely there. I think, there's opportunities here, especially if Brandon Cummings doesn't play for Pitt. John Rothstein reported that he's going to be a game time decision. That report came out about 9 hours ago earlier today.
Yeah.
So, you have there is an opening there at the guard position. His defensive presence is going to be missed. Who knows who they'll put in there? I haven't followed Pitt well enough to really know their lineups and rotations. So, but you have an opportunity here, and they have 5 guys on offense who can absolutely shift the momentum for this team and give them a lead in scoring. And we know that because we've seen them do it. I
Yeah.
think, my friend Bryce Cohen pointed out through the first 3 games that there was a different leading score in every game, counting the exhibition game. But then this 4th game came along, and then you had a 4th leading score with Brennan Lorient, and the one starter who hasn't had that sparking moment is Trayson Eaglestaff. And I think this will be the perfect opportunity for him to step up and win the hearts of WVU fans. Even though I think that there is a little bit of harshness being directed his way a little bit too early in the season, but this could be the moment for him to step in. And I will say he has been playing well in my humble opinion. I think he's, helped out on the rebounding end. He's played some,
Yeah.
the defense has left a little bit to be desired in instances, but he's been a good part of that first rotation. I think the forward play is where this game is really going to come down to it. How well do Harlan Obioha and Brennan Lorient handle Cameron Corhin and Papa Amadou Kante? Those are 2 really good forwards. They're the team's leading rebounders. Corhin is averaging a double-double right now, and so is Lorient. So I think that there's opportunities here for WVU to have an edge in this game, even if Brandon Cummings does play, honestly. So I think I don't think this team has fully meshed yet from a competitive standpoint. And I think that when it does, this is going to be a dangerous WVU basketball team. And it's going to carry over into Big 12 play. I think tomorrow would be a beautiful time to get a first glimpse of that, of what this WVU team could be, especially come later in the Big 12 season.
Of course, Big 12 play, conference play matters more. It just does. It just does.
Yep.
And conference play will even matter more to Pitt. ACC play is going to matter more to Pitt than this rivalry game. It's an out-of-conference game. But when you're a WVU fan, the Pitt game matters more than any other, separate from really what is a benefit to you and your program, just ask Rich Rod. And Ross Hodge is going to now learn that. And even though last year's team got better and almost got in the tournament, losing the brawl the way they lost it stuck into fans all year long. And they're still not over it. And they don't like this losing skid. And even though there's excuses because of the Eiler year and the drama and the end of Huggins and DeVries and then him leaving, etc., this game's the beginning of the season. So if you keep having new coaches and new eras and new systems and new rosters, there's time that's needed to gel. It makes sense. Last year, that was the excuse. We didn't gel yet. It was game 3 at the time. We're going to get better. And they did. But you go ahead and lose the brawl and you get blown out in the brawl. Ross Hodge is not fair to him. It's even when I asked him at the opening, at his intro presser, his opening presser. This isn't fair to you, but the program has pride and has 31 tournament appearances, which is up there top 20 all time. You can't just never get in the tournament and just keep saying it's next year, it's next year, it's next year. And we're, trusting the climb in a way for this basketball program. There's pressure on him to just get in now, or at least flirt with getting in and contend right away. And it can happen. Maybe you could even argue it's easier to happen for a basketball team in this era than on the football side. And yes, it's early. And yes, they really haven't gelled yet. And yes, they're hot and cold. And yes, Eagle staff's not clicked yet at all. And he's brought there to shoot, and he had 1 point in a game, and he's not really been shooting with efficiency yet. And forget the defense, but he got to shoot, and he's not shooting with enough of a clip. But they have depth. They have depth in scoring. They have more of it than last year's team. They're better defensively maybe at points than last year's team in terms of everybody being able to play defense. They have more size than last year's team. And yeah, Pitt's banged up and not much better. There's reason to believe at home in Morgantown that West Virginia should win this game, can win this game, and there's pressure to win this game and get off the snide and stop this bleeding in the Backyard Brawl. And you can't put this game anywhere else in the schedule. We already got comments on the site. I've seen multiple comments on the site, and actually thank you to a couple fans who are trying to tell people who are commenting this. You can't schedule the Brawl in basketball in February. People keep saying, well, just schedule it later because you got all these new coaches. You can't. This is it. Like, you out of conferences beginning of the year when the calendar turns and you pop the champagne for the next year. That's conference play. You can't all of a sudden. This isn't even football where you can choose to go out of it and do weird schedules. No, you're stuck. It got to be early in the season. And with all these out of conference tournaments that the Mountaineers like to play, which helps up their metrics, and everyone does them, you got to play the Brawl in November pretty much every year. It's going to be when it is. So you can't always just get blown out and say, well, hell, we didn't gel. I mean, that's not going to work anymore. You got to, at minimum, got to compete. It would be a gigantic win on the road for Pitt, but it would be also a really, really big deal for West Virginia for what's happened and for this era and for Ross Hodge and for the fans and to do it at home and all of that. And that could really propel them forward. But we've also seen teams lose the Brawl, Luke. And as much as you're high on the team, and I think this team should contend and how deep they are, losing the Brawl or certainly not competing in the Brawl could kind of stick into you for a while and then cause you to get into a rut. And that could be a death nail for this team that shouldn't need to be there this early in the season. So with all of that said, they can win. Maybe they're favored to win. Maybe they should win when you look at this season. How much pressure is on this game for you? Like, how much fire? I mean, you're closer to having recently graduated. How much wiggle room is there? This is year one. Ross Hodge is not going to get fired even if they never win a game in year one. But what will the atmosphere be like if this is another Brawl loss for you? How much pressure is on Hodge to get this victory?
Well, I think I I like to consider myself pretty reasonable,
Right.
and I
Yeah.
so I like to
The
think
question
of it,
might not be reasonable. I admit this might not be a
but
reasonable question because it is
no,
only
no,
game four
I
of
think
the
for
season.
sure. If you're
Yeah.
looking at if I'm answering this question honestly for myself, I think that there is added pressure. I think that there's an understanding that it's more important than any non-conference game you'll play,
Yeah.
and probably to a fan, it is probably, to the average fan, it's probably more important than most conference games, aside from, Kansas and any other opportunities they
Right.
get a high-ranked win. I think that, the pressure has alleviated for me just a tad bit because we saw it last year when WVU got blown out of the Brawl, and then they
Yeah.
still got snubbed from the NCAA tournament. The Big 12 is going to give you a lot of opportunities to get some quality wins, and I
Yeah.
don't think that a game this early can be fully indicative of the team. And I mean, we saw it last year too, where they lost the Brawl, and then a couple weeks later, they have a top three win over Gonzaga,
Yeah.
and then they
Yeah.
hung in
Better.
there against Louisville, and then they beat Arizona, and all in the
Yeah.
span of 3 days, four overtime games. Or three overtime games, excuse me. So I, d- I'm not. I think this would be a great win for the atmosphere, for the fan atmosphere. I think it would finally win some fans over to, hey, this team could be legit if the pieces fit right. I don't think that if they lose this game, that's not out of the question for me at all. But I think it'll definitely boost fan morale. I think a win in the Backyard Brawl in any sport's going to boost fan morale.
Yeah.
So looking at it from the standpoint of the season's definitely not over if they lose this game. But to a lot of fans, some fans might hit the panic button. And, personally, I know I won't. I probably wouldn't until we get too deep into conference play, or unless they start losing some of those too many of those P4 games before we get to conference play. So I think that there's definitely a level of, this is a rivalry, this is important. I think you need to see the buy-in from the coach. I think Ross Hodge knows how important the game is. He definitely stressed that after the win over Lehigh. And, you definitely need to see that buy-in from the players. So I'm really going to be excited to see what the atmosphere is like. I'd imagine it'll be a lot better than, not saying that there were bad atmospheres in the first couple games, but I'd imagine that it will blow the first 3 games out of the water. So it's going to be interesting to see this team, how they respond to a heavy fan presence in their favor. So I don't know. I think that I could really be talked into either way, but I've been leaning optimism for this team. So unless the whole team gets injured, and also we have to think about it, this team's not at full strength either. Last year the team was the last year the team was at full strength. So I really don't know how much we'll know about this team if they lose. I can tell you we'll know a good bit if they win, especially if they win by you know win by double digits or something like that. But you still have Chance Moore, you still have Jackson Fields, who have not seen the floor yet. Sounds like Jackson Fields is getting closer to coming back based on what Ross Hodge said the other night. But I'm wary to give any final judgment on this team based off of the 4th game of the season.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's the 4th game of the season, but separate from the rivalry, another reason why this is a big test, this is going to be the very first time, let's just be honest, the very first time this year that they are going to face a team with equal talent. They've had bad moments already. There already were moments this year that made fans think, oh, they might get upset here. There was concern at points so far through these first 3 games, and yet they won them because they're the more talented team, and they're the P4 team, and they are West Virginia, and those teams are not. In the brawl, you're facing a similar type of team than you. So if you go through those spurts where you're struggling, Pitt could actually beat you, even though it's in Morgantown. So it's the first test in general off of the best team they're going to face. And it's, of course, the Backyard Brawl. So you win it. You can use it as the first big win. You can point to it as something for the Ross Hodge era. You can even say what you just said, that, okay, we got this one over a Power 4, over a rival, a big game, and we're not even full strength. So look what would have happened if we were full strength. Imagine that. Will be better as the season goes on. If you lose it, then you're going to have fans saying, oh, man, all is lost, and we got to get these guys back tomorrow, or else we're going to have the season go off the rails. But, of course, doesn't mean the season is over either, because last year's season was kind of saved despite the brawl loss. But these are always going to be early in the year. It's just when they're going to be. So if it's a big game to you, the chemistry thing is never going to be perfect for any team, even if you have a staff who's been around forever in this era. So you need to figure it out, and you need to have a chance at a victory, and you need to get that victory when you know how big of a deal it is to the fan base. I think there's tons of pressure there for sure for Hodge in his first brawl. And maybe you're foreshadowing Eagle staff finally flapping his wings for the first time this year. Now, we will wrap up with another big game on the hardwood for a Mountaineer team, and that is the women's team, who is now facing an opportunity as well, a test for them as well, a major test for them and a major chance to score a big-time victory, maybe the biggest win, you could argue, the regular season for Mark Kellogg in his brief tenure there, as he's looking to get them back in the NCAA tournament and build off of the last 2 years and maybe even go beyond. Not a superstar there, but Shaw's getting it done, and this team is winning so far with some comfortable margin victories so far. But a win over Duke, doing it at the Greenbrier, would be a gigantic deal. How big of a deal? We talked brawl, big deal for Ross Hodge, a rivalry game. How big of a deal is this matchup for Mark Kellogg? Sure, it'd be a gigantic win, a feather in his cap and for his resume if they get it. If they lose it, I imagine you're going to say all is not lost. The season's not over. You certainly can still fix it. But how big of a deal is this big-time game at the Greenbrier for the women?
I think it would be a huge deal. I absolutely do. Duke is a good team. They have four players in double-digit scoring average, and there's one. The next one down is 9.7. So darn near five players with double-digit scoring. And I think that this is still a team that could, if WVU wins this game, you are telling the Big 12 that they are still contenders, even without JJ Quinterly and
Yeah.
even without a lot of the other depth pieces that they lost last year. Sydney Shaw is having a tremendous year, and she's leading this WVU team very well. And, her and Jordan Harrison are a very good combo guard setup.
Yeah.
And I think a big reason for me why it still screams Big 12 contender potential is because Duke had had a narrow loss on November 3rd to Baylor, 58-52, and that's kind of what dropped them out of the top 10 like they started the season as. Because I mean, this women's basketball team has something to prove. They never dropped down to the top 25 last year, and they got a few votes to start this year.
Yeah.
I think that this team has an opportunity to show that, hey, we're more than just JJ Quinterly, and that is nothing against, JJ Quinterly is a tremendous player. Loved what she was doing at the
Yeah.
Dallas Wings this season.
Yeah. She's
But
very, very good.
there's some talent on this WVU team. They're not as tall as they were last year, and they've always been one of the shorter teams in the Big 12, specifically under Kellogg. So we're gonna have to see how that plays out. I know at least Duke last season had a pretty tall team. Saw them play against Lehigh in the first round of the NCAA tournament. So that was that was really cool to see them, and maybe they're using a little bit of the scout from last year, probably leaning on this year too. But that's just the thing is WVU. It's always the rebounding battle, the battle inside has always been a huge deal for the WVU women's team. So just looking down the line, I actually wanted to check out the rebounding stats. They're out rebounding their opponents by 10 so far this year, but none of those teams that they've played so far could lift a finger to Duke. So we're just going to
Yeah.
have to see how this one plays out. I mean, just looking down the line, Sydney Shaw averaging 16 a game. Oh, WVU has five players in double digits scoring with Sydney Shaw, Jordan Harrison, Kiera Wheeler, Gia Cook,
You could
and
argue it's
Riley
just more
McCluskey.
diversified scoring than the last couple of years, where
Absolutely.
they don't have to
Yeah.
rely on just one player, even though they don't have one player to carry them if everyone's off, like they did have with
Yeah.
Quinterly. But maybe there's a positive there that they have a maturation process with everybody else, and Shaw steps up and elevates herself. If you remember, I'm sure you do, a couple years ago, nobody ever thought JJ Quinterly would become one of the greatest women's basketball players of all time, if not women athletes in Mountaineer athletics history. She was a role player kind of, and
Yeah.
nobody thought she would do what she did the last couple of years, and she did, and she's in WNBA because of it. So maybe Shaw could do the same. Maybe we're not giving her enough credit, but maybe there's more depth for, not like the men. Maybe there's more depth in scoring. Maybe there's not a Javon Small for the men, but there's depth that anybody can do it on a given night. Maybe that's the case
Yeah.
for the women that wasn't there last year.
I absolutely agree, specifically from the case of Shaw, too. I mean, Shaw's
Yeah.
shooting over 50% from three-point range so far this year. She's 11 of 19. She's really stepped up into that role. And, obviously, everybody all eyes on JJ Quinterly all of last year. So
Yeah.
I think what I've been looking forward to seeing is, do you have different players stepping up and stepping up in those moments? And so far they have. I mean, five double-digit scores is very, very good. So that's
Yeah.
always yeah. I mean, you're going to win a lot of games if you have five double-digit scores. So maybe they don't have that inside presence. Maybe they don't have one of those big time rebounders down low who can hang in there with an Audie Crooks or something like that in the Big 12. But maybe you don't have to worry about rebounding if you hit shots. So I think that I would
Yeah.
say going to have to look for a lot of scoring, and we know that these Mark Kellogg led teams always have a good defensive presence out there.
It's hard for me not to imagine that this game is going to go in a similar fashion to how the NCAA tournament losses have been against Iowa with Caitlin Clark, and then even against North Carolina. And those are obviously elite teams and the best teams they faced in each of those individual years, where they were competitive for a while. They showed they belonged for a while. and then they eventually lost to a better team and had that team pull away at the end. It feels like that's going to be similar here. That's my prediction. That it's going to be similar here. The Duke will eventually pull away. They are the better team. Everything West Virginia can do, and they can also do it better. Is kind of the evaluation, simply put. It doesn't mean the year's over for West Virginia women, and it does not mean that they can't still be a ranked team eventually, maybe contend in the Big 12, maybe somehow win a Big 12 title, certainly make the tournament, maybe even do with a better seed than the last couple of years, and they even have a better overall team, regardless of record, than the last several years without a true superstar, and maybe a better group. But it's hard for me to imagine they'd get this win. Obviously, if they get the win, it's a major resume booster. It could really help them get a better seed and could show the sky's the limit, not only for the season, but for the program. So I guess what I then will pivot as we end the show, Luke. If West Virginia does not win the game, and even if they lose the game in a way that shows that clearly they're not yet in the class of Duke, and Duke wins the game comfortably, what does that then tell you about this team, this 2025-2026 group for the WVU women? Does it expose them? Is that a proper term here? What does it show you about their ceiling? People then would probably argue that Sweet 16 bar that Kellogg says they got to get over, the program's not been there since 92, just getting in the tournament's not good enough anymore. That might be an argument that is the ceiling for this program. Would that expose all of that and say all of that, or would that be reading too much into a regular season game?
I think it really does come down to the rebounding battle. I think that, that's where WVU struggled a lot in years past. And I think just overall being shorter than other teams has been the main issue. And that's been what's held them back in the past couple years, particularly in the postseason. So I think, there is some height. I see a couple 6'4" players on Duke, some 6'3", 6'2", some height at the guards. That's going to have to be something that you watch and see how they respond to, because that has been the issue in the past couple years, whether it's the Big 12, the Big 12 tournament, NCAA tournament.
Right.
That's been the point of contention there, because, it's especially, I mean, not even just on rebounding, on offense. If you can't get going in the half court offense, you're going to lose, and you can turn them over in transition. You can, get the layups off of fast breaks all you want, but you're going to have to be able to score in the half court. You're going to have to be able to stop people in the half court. So I think that there's some relative things. I would also just kind of lean to where what I said for the men's team as well is it's early. And I think that,
It is.
the women's team is obviously playing some more complete games early in the season. They're just blowing teams out of the water early on, as they have in the past couple years under Mark Kellogg. So I think there's still, you have to see how they respond to that adversity, because you didn't really get that last year for the women's team until well into November during their Feast Week tournament, the Gulf Coast Invitational, whenever they played against Texas, who was a top 10 team. And shoot, they took them right down to the wire. So that was the quality loss, as a lot of people would call it if it were in football. So I think I think the main takeaway either way will be it's early. So it's really hard to tell what this team could fully potentially be. But I am always going to be interested to see how they handle just the size of their opponent and, the rebounding battle as well.
Rebounding is always something to discuss for both the men and the women, and seemingly always something that holds both those two teams back. We will see if that gets corrected, at least for the women, in a big-time matchup. Absolutely would be the biggest win in the regular season for Mark Kellogg. Maybe the biggest win in general for Mark Kellogg as WVU's head coach. Maybe even the biggest regular season win for the women in program history for a while, or maybe in general. I mean, those conversations would occur if they would get a victory like this over this kind of program. And it's not in Morgantown, but it certainly is going to be a friendly atmosphere, you would imagine, kind of a cool event as well that we'll be covering, and Luke will be there in attendance. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. I don't think that a loss for either group, the men or the women, in the Brawl or at the Greenbrier, means either season is over. However, fans are going to go there if they don't at least compete, and certainly if they get blown out in those games, certainly if you repeat last year for the men in the Backyard Brawl, and really even for the women, you're going to absolutely get up, I don't want to deal with another rebuilding season. I don't want to have to lose the pit again. If you're the man, Ross Hedge is, he's not the guy. And then for the women, there's a ceiling. We're never going to be Duke. That's going to be the discussion. I already know. You get victories, you shut up that noise. We'll see what happens, and a lot on the line for Ross Hedge and Mark Kellogg, respectively, before this week closes out. That'll do it for this edition of the show. So Mountaineer Report, again, available everywhere you get your podcasts. And, of course, our coverage is available at West Virginia Sports Now.